There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hi everyone, it's Mia here. I'm just popping into your feed to revisit an episode that we originally released in 2018. It's an interview with a woman called Kyl Myers, who alongside her partner Brent chose to raise their child Zuma as genderless until Zuma could choose their own pronouns and their own gender identity. So recently there was an episode of 60 Minutes that ran a story about Kyl and some other parents who are raising their babies and small children in this genderless way, which is called gender creative parenting. Now, there was backlash to the story. A lot of people had questions, and I had questions too when I first heard about it, which is why I originally reached out to Kyl back in 2018. So have a listen, keep your mind open. And since we recorded this interview, Zuma has chosen the pronouns he, him, and now has a male gender identity. And they've also had another baby. Kyl and Brent welcomed another child that they are also going to raise in this gender creative way. The baby is called Neon. So huge congratulations to the whole family. Here is Kyl Myers.
I'm not going to ask Zoomer, are you a boy or a girl, right? Because they may be like, I'm just Zoomer and I'm actually really liking these they, them pronouns. We don't know.
From the Mamma Mia podcast network, I'm Mia Friedman and you're listening to No Filter, candid conversations that count. Here's a thing to know about being pregnant. When you tell people that you are, one of the first questions that they'll ask is, so do you know what you're having? Is it a boy or a girl? But for Kyl Myers and a growing number of parents around the world, those questions are irrelevant because they've decided not to tell anyone the sex of their child. Kyl and her partner Brent practice something called gender creative parenting, which means that they don't disclose the biological sex of their child and they don't use the pronouns he or she. They have a gorgeous little kid called Zuma, and they use the pronouns they, them, and their when describing Zuma to other people. Now, I can hear you rolling your eyes, and I can hear the judginess, but just park that thought for a minute. I first came across Zuma's story when I read a fascinating article in New York Magazine a few months ago, and it was about gender creative parenting. And at first, I think when I read the headline, I also rolled my eyes and I thought that I'd be very judgy. But then I decided to actually read the article and then I kept reading and reading. And then I immediately decided that I could tell whether Zuma had been born biologically male or female. So I went straight to the family's Instagram page, which is called Raising Zuma. And for a little while, I pored over all the photos of this adorable, smiley little toddler, determined that I was going to figure it out. But why did I actually do that? Why did I need to know? And why does the idea of gender creative parenting and using particular pronouns and not others make some people really furious? Well, it turns out that Zuma's mum, Kyl, actually has a doctorate in sociology and gender studies. She's a doctor of those things. And after I spoke about this topic on Mamma Mia Out Loud and I mentioned Zuma's story, Kyl reached out to me on Instagram to say thank you for having an open mind about my family and the way we've chosen to bring up our kid. I had so many questions, you won't be surprised to know. So, of course, I asked her to join me on No Filter, and she was an absolute delight to talk to. Here's Kyl Myers. Tell me about the day you found out you were pregnant with Zuma.
Yeah. It was my 29th birthday, and Brent and I had been trying for like 2 months. And I remember the night before, because it's like not fun to try to make a baby.
It's really not. It's not.
I didn't think it was fun. It was the least fun sex that I've had in my life, probably. And the night before I found out, I remember just being like, I just want to stop thinking about this all the time, right? Like thinking about like my fertility and when we're going to get pregnant and checking my app, and stuff. And so I woke up on my birthday and I was like, I'm just going to see if I'm pregnant because I need to know like how hard I can go today, And I was like, oh, well, surprise. It was positive, and I kind of like walked into the bedroom and had this huge smile on my face, but like this nervous look, I think probably too. And I just was like, we did it.
And when was the first conversation you had about gender creative parenting and the fact that that's what you were going to try to do with this baby?
Probably 6 or 7 months before. I specifically remember we were on a road trip and I brought it up. I told Brent about Sasha and Storm, these two kids back in, I think, 2011 or 2008 might have been when those stories broke. But Sasha is a kid from the UK. Storm is a kid from Canada. And I remember seeing those stories when I was in college. And, these kids that weren't assigned a gender and their parents were just like, we're just going to follow their lead and, see how this plays out. And we're just going to treat them like a child. And we're going to ask those around us to be conscious of that and not be, treating them like a stereotypical boy or girl. And we're just going to let their identity evolve and see how that goes. And there was just this media craze around it. So many negative comments, so many spinoff articles and things. And it was really in those comments section that I was like, people have such a different understanding of sex and gender than I do. People have such a different understanding about gender identity and it falling on a spectrum and the fact that intersex people exist, right? Like even biological sex, as people like to think of it, isn't this cut and dry binary thing. And I think that seeing this commentary in these comments section, I was just like, I can't do like a mainstream way of parenting.
I wanted to ask you about that because the idea of gender creative parenting, as it's called, does inspire anger in people. And some of the things that people say is that you're stopping your child from having an identity, it's psychologically harmful for your child, you're stigmatizing your child. Why do you think it makes people angry? Because that's a weird kind of, when you break it down, that's a weird reaction. What are we scared of?
I can't understand the anger really. And I try to patiently and politely kind of give my perspective and my point of view. I think a lot of the anger is actually really, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what we're doing, right? Of this, like, well, because you change diapers, don't you? It's like, yeah, like Zoomer has anatomy. Like we acknowledge that and we actually teach Zoomer the proper words to be able to describe their anatomy. And that is different though from their gender identity and the experiences that we want to create for them, right? Like we don't see these things as innately intertwined as people really want it to be, just like they're either a boy or a girl and like, and that we are erasing that from Zoomer's identity or experience of life. And I think that that's really wrong. It's just inaccurate, right? We don't know if they are a boy or a girl or if there is an identity that's going to resonate better with them. Every single kid comes to their own identity in their own time. And by doing what we're doing, I actually think we're providing so much more freedom and acceptance, right? For them to just be whoever they want to be. And we're not doing this in a vacuum, right? Mm-hmm. Like they go to school, they watch TV, they're around us, right? Like we communicate, they're around people all of the time. What we're doing though is just trying to make a lot more conscious decisions to help them have a different narrative about the world, right? That like not everybody is a boy or a girl, right? And not everybody with a penis is a boy, not everybody with a vulva is a girl, and not everybody has a mommy and a daddy. Like we're just, doing this age appropriate commentary for Zoomer's life to actually reflect the reality of the world that they're growing up in. And I don't think that they're going to have any problem figuring out where they fit in that reality.
Yeah. So the practical steps, and I imagine that, parenting is hard enough, let alone, I guess, having to educate people about pronouns and about having to very mindfully and intentionally deconstruct all the sort of the gender things that are in our world. Yeah. What are some of the things that you had to do in the preparation for Zoomer's birth and in the last couple of years since Zoomer was born?
So we created a blog, raisingzoomer.com, and it was actually started for our friends and for our family because there was just I just had this idea that it would probably be more effective if I could just write these explanations down and have hyperlinks, to websites and things that if people wanted to learn more about it, because I think sometimes in the heat of a moment, right, it can be a tough conversation to have with people who care about you and who love you and who want to support you, but also want to be able to ask questions and don't want to hurt your feelings and don't want to offend you, and so I just wanted to create some space where I could just write it down, like these reflections, and that people could go on and be like, okay, Kyl is helping me understand sex and gender. I mean, I teach this, right? Like in a university setting, I teach sex and gender. And so I was like, let me just do like a sex and gender 101 class for our network, So I did, an article about sex and gender, an article about like why we were naming Zoomer, what we were naming them, an article about like how we're buying clothes for them, like the decisions that we make, right, when we're shopping, and just different stuff. And so we put that on, and it was password protected. We just sent this link out with a birth announcement. So before Zoomer was born, I kind of wrote, okay, here's our birth announcement that's going out to all of our work colleagues and our friends and our family. And we're going to let them know, here's a picture of Zoomer, and we've decided not to assign a gender. We're just going to let Zoomer decide who they are. And here's a link to a website where we've tried to proactively answer some of your questions and like talk to us about anything you want, So I think we went, we just kind of made sure, let's be approachable and accessible and try to put this out there, and just know that we're so grateful that people are open to doing this with us, right? And open to trusting us with this decision. And so that was probably a heavy lift, right? Of like, and Brent is an art director. So he just, designed this really beautiful website, and it was password protected. And eventually though, just slowly people would be like, hey, like my hairdresser is pregnant and I was telling her about you and Zoomer, and she's really interested in learning more. Can I give her the password? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. And so it just kind of kept growing like that. People asking, for friends who were interested. So then we just made it public, for people to be able to stumble upon it if they needed to, and made the Instagram, mainly for our friends and family, but then found a really, really cool community of people just all across the world. And so that was good. So I would say that was like the thing that we kind of put out into the world for people.
How did your family and friends react? Because I imagine you explained it to them before Zoomer was born. Mm-hmm. What was the reaction from them?
There were diverse reactions, I would say. I mean, it depended on who. I mean, everyone overall was supportive. I think there was different rates at which they got on board, though. It depended. And I think it depended also whose family we were talking to. Was it my family or was it Brent's family? Because everyone in my family expected this of me, right? They're like, oh, Kyl, the roaring feminist who's just always like, has things to say and is challenging systems. Like, yeah, we're not surprised you're doing this. We have some questions and, but no one was surprised that I was doing this. I'd been talking about gender equity and talking about how we need to be changing the way we're raising children and all types of things. So no one was surprised on my side, really. They didn't understand it as much, but they really trusted us and supported us and were really lovely. I think there was a couple moments of like maybe some disappointment or some confusion of maybe grandparents thinking this makes me sad to think that like if you're trying to hide their sex, that I don't get to have these interactions with them that I would want as a grandparent, right? And it was like, well, hold on, like you will know, right? Like you will have the opportunity to bathe Zoomer and, so.
Yeah, or change a nappy and have Zoomer stay the night and help her stay the night and help them get dressed or.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to jump in and correct myself because I also remember something interesting when you said when people accidentally misgender Zoomer, it often depends on their children, whether they have a son or a daughter or what's in their mind. Because it is like, how do people decide if they misgender
Right.
Zoomer, why did that just come out of my mouth then?
Right. There's lots of reasons, either cues, because they have decided because of what Zoomer's wearing or their hair, or because, they have a daughter or a son. So they're just really used to using those pronouns,
I looked through the
whatever it
whole
may be.
Instagram after I read about you, and I was determined to crack it. I'm like, I've got 3 kids. I'm going to work this out. Like as if it was some kind of Rubik's Cube puzzle that I had to solve. And I couldn't. In some photos, I'd go, oh, Zoom is a girl. And then I'd be like, oh, no, Zoom is a boy. And then I ended up observing my own behavior and going, why do I care? Why is it so important for me to put this kid in a box? And what does it mean?
Well, I think gender is just one of the most important categories that people try to put somebody in, right? I mean, it's really the first thing that people ask when they find out you're expecting, or I mean, it's just really one of the first distinctions that I think we make, maybe even if we don't have a person in front of us and we're looking at a resume, right? Like our brain is immediately going to go, oh man, oh woman, right? And then I think you kind of get a little bit defensive because, I mean, my name's Kyl, right? And so I've applied for jobs and then shown up and they're like, I wasn't expecting a woman, It's like, surprise, like just these. I mean, I really do think it's one of the most important social categories that people try to put people in, right? And I think that's kind of where this whole thing comes from, is like, we really need to pump the brakes on the biases that we have, this need for knowing, because I think it's this thing that we do because we think we'll be able to sum somebody up so much more if we just know their gender, right? These stereotypes that we would be able to assign to them or feel like we would know them. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, we just are programmed to sort and categorize things. So my training, right, is in sociology and in population level health. And really in graduate school, I was really exposed to adult gender disparities. And so reading a lot about different rates of suicide, different rates of just even acute illnesses, just these different things that men and women were experiencing. So for example, women are more likely to have acute illnesses, like being sick more often, but kind of in the same way as kids are, right? Because women are socially, more in this parenting role, in this caregiving role. And so they're maybe at home more with children. And so getting exposed to more of these things, right? So they're having these type of acute illnesses, whereas like a gender disparity that we see for men is like they're less likely to wear a seatbelt. They're less likely to wear a helmet. And so they're more likely to be injured or die from, a car accident or a motorcycle accident or whatever it may be, because they aren't taking safety precautions. And so what we learn really in sociology is a lot of these health disparities, like one of the biggest predictors is gender, not sex, right? It's not like your penis gets in the way of putting a seatbelt on, right? Like it's not.
I hate it when that happens.
Sex, So
yeah.
So I think my mind was just trying to follow these breadcrumbs back to where can we fix this? Because I see a lot of fixing as far as gender inequalities go, trying to happen in like the adult world. And I don't think that that's where we have the most impact. I genuinely think that we're going to have the most impact in childhood.
Yeah. So how do you navigate the world with Zoomer in terms of, I love your Instagram account, and I can see that for parents of gender creative kids, there are a lot of really deliberate decisions to be made, like haircuts and clothes. How do you navigate that?
Well, clothes wise, I mean, we really love, now Zoomer picks out their own clothes, which is really fun. And so we kind of we'll take them shopping, and family will bring them clothes though too, but Zoomer really loves colors. They love different types of animals. They are like, they have really specific interests. It's really fun. We'll say like, go get your shoes. Or like if we bring a pair of shoes, they're like, not those shoes, I need these shoes. And like, not this shirt. I need the crocodile shirt, and not those shorts. I need the pink shorts,
2 years old.
It's so, I know. So we give them a lot of freedom with that, but it was actually really fun. When they were, an infant, we were able to just Bond's wonder suits they lived in, for sure. Those were fabulous. And I give props also to Bond's, because in that infant stage, they don't gender it, right? They're just wonder suits for babies. And I really appreciate that. And we do try to give our money to companies that are making, efforts to just have clothes for kids. I think that that's really important, and we like that. We just tried to balance it, right? We just would get a lot of colors, get a lot of fun different prints, and steer clear from really hyper gendered things, like really hyper feminine or really hyper masculine things. Like we didn't put Zoomer in flashy tulle dresses when they were 2 months old. And it was really less about femininity as much as it was about comfort. We just really tried to prioritize comfort for Zoomer. And we didn't get shirts that said, daddy's whatever.
Yeah, little girl or daddy's little boy. Yeah.
Yeah. Or stud, heartbreaker, lock up your daughters. I think those are really problematic things anyway. We steer clear away from anything that's sexualized or really, really hypergendered. But otherwise, we could easily go shopping in H&M or Gap or Target, right? We just would find whatever clothes were cute and comfortable. As far as hair goes, we're just letting their hair grow until they can communicate to us how they would like their hair. I do cut their fringe to keep it out of their eyes, but they'll kind of let us know, I want to wear a hat today. I want my hair in a pony, and just different stuff like that, just following their lead. And I think that people don't give credit to kids as enough, or maybe as early, that they really can make decisions, about what they like.
Who knows Zoomer's sex? How many people know?
Oh gosh, quite a few. I mean, so our family members know. Zoomer goes to a daycare, so their teachers know. A lot of the parents of the other kids at that daycare would know, because they might be in the room when Zoomer's diaper is being changed. Their healthcare providers know. I guess the person at TSA who's checking Zoomer's passport knows. There are people who know Zoomer's sex, and mainly it's in this considered what we considered necessary, right? They're changing a diaper. They're the healthcare provider. Otherwise, it isn't necessary. And people who are in their world, we are regulars at certain restaurants, and they just love Zoomer, and they don't know Zoomer's sex, but they know Zoomer's gender creative, and they use gender neutral pronouns, and it just doesn't seem to phase people in our community,
Is it exhausting having to have the conversation all the time, like at the supermarket? Does it come up a lot?
It does not come up nearly as much as people think it comes up. I mean, I think people are like, oh, you must be having this conveation 100 times a day. First of all, if I saw 100 people a day, I would never leave the house, I just want people to think critically, right? Think about your average Monday, right? What do you do? I take my kid to school where they are with the same, 10 kids in the classroom, with the families who we know, all the families, they know who we are. They know Zoomer's gender creative. They use they, them pronouns. If they ever slip, they're sorry. And we're no big deal. Thanks for trying. It's all about this consciousness, right? And we have great conversations, and we recommend books to each other, and we hang out. It's great. We invite them to Zoomer's birthday party. We get invited to their birthday parties. So there's this little world of daycare. And then it's not like there's new employees at my work every single day, right? All 10 people who I work with know, right? They were on the birth announcement list, right? They know. And then we go to the grocery store, and someone's the cashier will be can I give her a sticker? And it's yeah, sure. Zoomer, you want a sticker? Cool. Or if we're at a restaurant, someone's what can I get him? We're Zoomer, what do you want? It's just
right. You don't get up and say, and deliver your TED Talk.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kyl Myers. I would like to talk to you about pronouns today, at the cafe. That's not how this goes. And so we just kind of have this very specific guideline of if we're at the park and someone's kid comes up and starts playing, and I'm having a really short conversation, and they just ask how old's your son? How old's your daughter? What, I'm just 2.5. It's not a big deal. But if they do say something sorry, very rarely nowadays do people say, they just assume a gender for Zoomer. They just assume gender. And
do they assume the same gender, or it's split?
No, it's pretty balanced. It's pretty, and it largely depends on what Zoomer is wearing. And so that's why we do make some conscious decisions of you're being gendered like a girl a lot lately. Let's make sure that like, let's balance this out, because what we're also trying to make sure is that when we are out and about, that they hear balanced adjectives, right? That they hear that they're beautiful and that they're fast and strong. And, like we want them to get like nuanced experiences, right? But if it's going to be someone who's in our world, then we'll absolutely be like, just so you know, like, we're gender creative parents, and this is what that means to us. And people are really kind and, and supportive. But I think it also is because of our approach of just like, we know this is new for you, and we want you to be comfortable to ask questions, but just like, these are the reasons why we're doing it. We just really don't want our kid to be experiencing a lot of gender stereotypes. And we want them to just be able to come to their identity on their own terms. And they're like, cool. And then oftentimes they'll be like, I dated a transgender person, or like my sister's child is transitioning right now, or whatever it is, whatever it may be. But it kind of opens these doors to having really, really fantastic conversations.
How is gender creative parenting different to parenting a trans child?
Oh, I can't really speak to that. But I mean, it's different. So Zoomer hasn't come out as trans to us, right? And like, we are just raising Zoomer to be able to
choose a gender.
To choose a gender identity, and not necessarily a binary identity. That's not that's not like the only options that are available to them, right? And I'm not going to ask Zoomer, are you a boy or a girl, right? Because they may be like, I'm just Zoomer and I'm actually really liking these they them pronouns, or maybe they'll be fluid. We don't know. But I think the thing that would be similar to raising a transgender child is like, the most important thing is just following their lead, and trusting that your kid knows who they are, and accepting them and loving them, and not trying to make them feel bad about having certain interests, or, just that's the whole point of gender creative parenting, is that kids know who they are, and they thrive most in loving and accepting homes.
Has Zoomer ever asked you if they're a boy or a girl?
No, I don't think we're there yet language wise, right?
Yeah.
Like, their language is really exploding. And they're starting to use pronouns, not for themselves, but they will use pronouns. And it's been fun to listen to them, use pronouns, like, and to also check myself on where I'm at, like how I feel about them using pronouns, right? So like a week ago, they had this little toy train, and they put it under their blanket, and they said they take a nap. Right. They used a pronoun, this gender neutral train took a nap, and I was like, oh, they're using gender neutral pronouns. This is amazing, and then like a few days later, we were at the zoo, and we're at this bird show, and an owl or whatever flies over, and Zoomer goes, there he goes, and I was like, and then I found myself being like, we do not know if that owl is, I mean, like, to myself, I wasn't like, now, 2-year-old Zoomer, have I taught you nothing? We do not assume gender identities of barn owls,
You were saying also, like, if something has a backstory, like a character on a show, like Dory the fish,
right?
You will say she, because Dory has a backstory, but the barn owl, however, has no backstory that we know of.
Yeah, I know. So that, but I think what's cool though is that, like, I'm aware of it though, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I am aware that Zoomer just used a he pronoun for the owl, but they used a they pronoun for the train. And I hear them call their trucks alternating, she, he, and they pronouns. And so it's like, they're using pronouns because they're developing language, and this is really important for them, right? But just it's leveling up the way that we're teaching them about the world, right? Because for so often it was just, I'm just going to try to narrate the world that I want for you. I'm going to call little kids friends. I'm going to call adults grown-ups. I don't call women moms. I don't call men dads, right? But Zoomer will sometimes. And I think that that's okay, right? They're categorizing like we do as humans, and we're at the aquarium and Zoomer's like a mommy fish and a Zoomer fish, and it's like, maybe, but like, and I'm not trying to turn every single outing with
into
my
a
kid,
teaching moment.
Right. I just find myself being like, okay, what Zoomer is seeing right now is a big fish and a little fish. And I am the big fish and they are the little fish. And so if it's a mommy fish and a Zoomer fish right now, we're just going to do this, So, but I love that they call other kid friends. They don't call them boys and girls. I love, just that's what we're trying to do is just help them normalize, wheelchairs, help them understand diversity in skin color, help them understand these types of things,
You and Zoomer's father, are you both cisgender?
We are both cisgender. What that means is that when we were born, our parents and the world and whatever, like assigned us gender, right? Based on our sex. So like I was assigned female at birth and I was assigned a girl at birth. And as I've grown up, that works for me. I don't have dysphoria around my body, right? I don't have dysphoria around like this gender identity that's given to me. But that said, I'm curious about like, I wonder if I would have been raised gender creative, right? Like how would have that panned out for me? I had a really wonderful childhood. And I did feel really supported in being able to explore whatever I wanted, my interests, and had a really like strong personality that I don't feel anybody tried to, mold out of me. And I'm grateful for that. But I still wonder, I still wonder, like, okay, I'm like 32 and I wish I had a different relationship with myself and like body hair or, just these things that I'm trying to critically think through now as an adult, as I am responsible for this tiny child and helping them learn about the world and people and differences and norms and bodies and, and just really trying to check myself.
What happens next? How does this play out?
I mean, just like any other parent, right? Like what happens
who knows?
Next? I mean, like who knows, right? I mean, truly, like most non-binary kids and transgender kids are raised by cisgender parents who assigned them a gender, right? And a sex at birth. And I don't know, like Zoomer is so incredible though. And I think as their language develops, they are asking more questions. And I think they'll start asking more questions about gender. But as of right now, like with their little friends, right, they just call each other by their first names. I don't hear them say boys or girls yet, especially because the daycare that they go to is very mindful about it and they call all of the kids friends. And
do Zoomer's friends use they, them, their pronouns?
I don't know. We're kind of there at drop off and pick up and, every once in a while, they just call them Zoomer, really. But I think that's going to evolve, right, in the next even several months as their language evolves because Zoomer's just with a bunch of other 2-year-olds, that are all just figuring it out. And like,
learning
they don't
to
give
talk.
a shit about pronouns, but they just like love each other. They're all just friends and they just play together. And
you've said that you think at around 3 or 4, Zoomer will decide what their gender identity is. Do you still think that?
I do. But I also don't think that it's going to be like concrete, right? Like Zoomer's going to just one day in 6 months or a year say, oh, I'm this. And my pronouns are this. I think that we're going to start hearing them use pronouns for themselves and we will hear them categorize themselves and nothing is really going to change as far as how we parent though, right? It's not like we're like fantastic and then just like glob on the stereotypes, just like throw out all their clothes and take them, shopping down one aisle. One part of the store.
The kids who are older than Zoomer, you mentioned Sasha and Storm. You're obviously very hooked into the gender creative community. How has it played out for other families as the kids have got older?
Yeah. So Storm and Sasha, I don't really know a lot about them anymore. Right before I had Zoomer though, I was able to get in touch with both of their parents. And just kind of in this like solidarity moment, I think, of like, hi, I'm doing this. I don't know of any other parents that are doing this except for you. Can you just tell me it's going to be okay? And they were like, it's going to be okay. It was the best decision we've ever made for our kid, and we were like, all right,
Okay.
here we go. But then turns out there's a huge community out there. And I didn't really discover it until I got on Instagram and started finding some people and then connected with someone who told me about a Facebook group. And I checked today, there's 256 members of it. And they're all people who are raising children with they, them pronouns from the start. So we have this little community that's fantastic. And it's people largely in the US, but also in Canada and in other parts of the world. So it's nice to have this community there of people to talk to. And what is apparent in this community, there are a lot of trans parents and non-binary parents and queer parents and parents who are in polyamorous families and relationships and single parents. But what I have learned over this time is I have enormous privilege, right? Like I have enormous privilege when it comes to where I stand as a gender creative parent. I have all of my family and friends are on board and supportive, and I live in a really safe environment. And I think that's not true for all gender creative parents. And so that's why I think it's really important for us to be visible. I feel really responsible for being visible and trying to help educate people and inform people and say, hey, this is happening. Because a lot of people, unfortunately, aren't really safe to do so because they're already having a struggle in their own world, for that. That said, I also think it's really important that like my cisgender voice isn't the only one, right? That's being kind of the spokesperson for this. And so it's really nice to see a lot of other families coming out and telling their stories and doing podcasts and doing interviews, and they blog. And if you want to find it, you can, right? Like they call themselves gender creative parents, gender open parents, gender expansive parents, right? Like there's a whole community out there that is just there to be a resource.
And knowing that community as you do, being inside it now, is there a certain age where kids will choose a gender?
Yeah, it seems a lot like around the 3 or 4, they'll say the pronouns that they want to go by. And what it seems like there's actually a lot of gender fluid kids who come out of gender creative parenting, right? Who absolutely know who they are. And they say, I want they or she pronouns, or, or maybe they do want he pronouns, but they understand pronouns. They understand gender identity, and they have the freedom, and the acceptance to really be like, this is where I think I fall. This is kind of what I would call myself. And I really love seeing these kids who are growing up in these families, saying, oh yeah, here's, so-and-so, our kid who is 11. They call themselves like a demi boy, and it's just like awesome. Right. And that kid is thriving because they're so loved and so accepted, and they get to be who they want to be.
And what about people, Kyl, who say, kids aren't generally the best decision makers when it comes to things that are good for them, right? So like you wouldn't let your kid choose what they had for dinner every night because they'd probably choose ice cream. Giving them the responsibility of choosing something as fundamental as gender is a very, very big burden to place on a child, some might argue. How do you respond to that?
I don't know. I guess I disagree with that overall statement, right? Of like, Zoomer does not understand what gender is right now. So if anything, like we've removed a pretty big burden off of them because they're not expected to, fulfill this destiny that I have in my mind for them about what they're going to be into, and like, what kind of interest they're going to have and what kind of career they're going to have and how my relationship is going to be with them and who they're going to fall in love with and yada, yada, yada. Like they actually have so much freedom. And I think if anything is apparent to me, little kids do not need gender like people think they do, right? Yeah. Like they don't understand it. They don't need it. And I think it's doing way more harm than good as far as the the heavy piling on of gender stereotypes and expectations and norms and all these biases that are kind of coming to the forefront. They're having huge implications. I mean, we even see there was a study recently that came out where it was this really simple experiment that they did. They read a story to some 5-year-olds about a really, really smart person. And then they read the same story to some 7-year-olds about a really, really smart person. And after the story, they would show the children a picture of a woman and a picture of a man. And they would say, who was the really, really smart person in this story? And the 5-year-olds would choose someone of their own gender, right? So the 5-year-old girls would choose the woman. The 5-year-old boys were more likely to choose the man. By 7, though, the girls were more likely to choose the man as the really, really smart person. And so I just think we are already seeing so much evidence that these stereotypes are taking hold really early, that, kids are just absorbing these conversations that are happening around them. And so I think by actually teaching kids and by consciously talking to teachers, by consciously challenging media, right, that we need to be doing better for our children because we are perpetuating inequality.
Yeah. Kyl, thank you so much. I found this the most eye-opening, heart and mind-opening conversation. I love your Instagram. I love your blog. I love what you're doing. I think Zuma is a really, really lucky little kid. And I've lost my obsession with working out whether they're a boy or a girl. You'll be thrilled to know. You've helped me realize that it actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And, for all the people out there that say it's a terrible thing to do to a child, I always come back to, you know what? There are kids in the world I'm worried for more than the ones whose parents are trying so hard to parent in a particular way with an intention of making the world better for their kids and making life better for their kids. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. You can follow Kyl on Instagram at RaisingZuma. And she's just been working on this fascinating project of a book or an e-book of all these different hairstyles for gender creative kids. You can read more about gender creative parenting at Kyl's website, which is raisingzuma.com. This show was produced by Liza Ratliff. I am Mia Friedman, and I will see you on mamamia.com.au. Thanks for listening to this episode of No Filter. I hope you enjoyed this revisit. I'm Mia Friedman, and thanks for having me in your ears.